Hello there. Tonight we will step aboard a quiet ship and follow a slow road of water. The harbor is settling. Ropes slacken. A small lamp at the prow keeps a steady circle of light. The wood creaks in the kind way that means everything is working. We travel with Odysseus, not to chase battles, but to drift toward home. The sea is calm and patient. Oars rest like folded wings until they are needed. Stars find their places and stay there, the way good guides do. Along the way, we will meet simple scenes that ask nothing of us. A beach of pale stones, red divided on a wooden board. A path through low trees that smell faintly of resin. A doorway that opens when you lift while you pull. If other things appear songs, winds, narrow straits, we will notice them gently and let them pass. There is no hurry tonight. The ship moves at the pace of breathing. If your eyes grow heavy, that is part of the journey. Let the water hum under the keel, and the wake undo itself behind us. Settle in. Let the dark grow comfortable. We will keep company with Odysseus until sleep comes, and even then the ship will carry you, steady and sure, toward the thought of home. The beach below Troy is quiet in the way a long flame finally becomes ash. Wind slips through the empty frames of tents and forgets to make them move. Ropes hang looser than they did yesterday. Poles lean a little and are allowed to. The last fires give off a low domestic warmth rather than the bright boast of victory. Oars lie in neat rows beside amphorae that cool slowly, the clay surrendering its heat, the way a day does when it's done. Shields are stacked with their faces turned inward, as if they have seen enough. The sea keeps a respectful distance, placing small, patient waves at the shoreline and letting them rest there. Far off, the ruins of the city smudge the horizon with a tired color that no one comments on. It is the kind of evening when sound becomes soft by agreement. A gull calls once and is satisfied. A cooking pot breathes out the last of its steam and becomes an ordinary pot again. Somewhere, a length of sailcloth lifts and falls and decides there is nothing urgent to report. Odysseus walks among the bundles and coils with the habit of a man who knows journeys are made of details. He taps each water jar with a knuckle and listens for the clear note that says full, the duller one that says almost, and the hollow that says fix this. He lifts a lid and smells the oil and recognizes the honest scent of work olives, sun, clean hands. He rubs a thumbful of grease where wood meets wood and hears the oarlock accept it without argument. He checks the leather where the steering oar clasps the pin, runs his palm along the tiller, and finds the small scar in the grain where rope once bit and was forgiven. When he straightens, he does not look toward the city. He looks toward the water, which is a kind of promise he understands. Around him, the crew move as carefully as people in a house where someone is sleeping. They count loaves and lay them in baskets, with folded cloth between layers. They thread lines through holes that remember them. Coil rope so it will not kink later and pretend it is fate. A man sits on a low crate and sews a neat stitch into the edge of a sail, tying off with the tidiness of someone who has learned that neatness saves lives. When the work pauses, Odysseus kneels to the sand and draws a map with the butt of his spear. Islands become simple, rounded shapes. Sea lanes become lines that know how to bend. He marks coves where water is sweet, places where fishermen trade willingly, stretches of coast where the wind runs in a particular way and can be read like a habit. He does not draw storms. Storms do not deserve invitation. He leaves monsters out. Monsters advertise themselves when they mean to. He writes the word rest more than once and underlines it in a slow hand, as if telling the sea a fact. One of the younger sailors watches and asks nothing, content to see that a voyage can look like a child's drawing when it is honest. Sand takes the lines and keeps them. A small breeze erases a corner, and Odysseus redraws it without irritation, the way a father straightens a blanket that will only be kicked loose again. A messenger from another camp arrives with a parting gift, a cup with thin handles and a pattern of vines that wander in well-behaved curves. Odysseus thanks him the way he thanks a well-tied knot, and sets the cup carefully in a chest. Cups are for tables. Tables are for houses. The thought of a house moves through him lightly, leaving no bruise. A doorway whose latch sticks unless you lift while you pull. An olive tree that leans into a patch of sun. A low wall of stones that holds the day's heat after the sun has gone. Dawn does not burst. It arrives as if invited. Cloth climbs the masts, whispering its old dry song, and the ship asks permission of the water by leaning into it. Men push. The keel sighs. The sand gives up what it has been holding. There is no cheer. There is only that tidy breath people make when work begins, the exhale that clears the way for the next thing. Troy shrinks behind them without drama, the way a story ends when it has been told enough times. The beach becomes a color. The color becomes a line. The line becomes part of the sky's idea of itself. Ahead, the water lies in broad, manageable pieces. The ship slides over a darker patch, and then a lighter one, and learns that both will carry it. The first orders are simple, and have been said 1,000 times. The ears that hear them do not need the words, but accept them anyway, because ritual keeps a deck steady. A boy counts oars as they are shipped out, one to starboard, one to port, a metronome of wood and shoulder and breath. A wineskin is tucked into shade. A coil of spare line is set where a hand will find it without searching. Out on open water, the ship becomes its own small country and sets out its laws. Eat when it is time. Row when it is time. Mend, coil, stow. Speak quietly. Look where you place your feet. Share what you are given. The oars rise and fall together, writing pale lines on the surface that vanish as soon as they are made. Bread is broken along the benches and served with olives and the careful wine that reminds a mouth to be patient. A tune starts in someone's throat, neither warlike nor sad, and forgets itself into a hum that suits the motion of the sea. Sun finds the salt on shoulders and turns it to a fine, clean glitter that is nobody's boast. A school of fish turns all at once and is gone. The sound of their going is nothing at all, and that is its charm. The ship's wake braids and unbraids behind them, a short-lived pattern that repeats without complaint. The sea, which can be anything, chooses to be reasonable. It offers small, steady weight to the hull and accepts it back again. Odysseus stands by the tiller with his hand laid lightly on the wood. He sights along the mast to a pair of old, trustworthy stars and sets the course the way one keeps a promise, without fuss and without letting go. He thinks of Ithaca in pieces small enough to carry, a patch of time that keeps bees busy by the path, the sound of a ladder settling against a wall, a bedpost shaved smooth by years of a hand finding it in the dark. He does not line these pieces up to make a picture. He lets them float and touch and drift apart, the way a man lets his thoughts be kind to him when the work is going well. A crewman asks, without urgency, whether the gods favor them today. They favor those who are ready, Odysseus says, and means that readiness is a prayer you can hold in your hands. He points out a line in the sky cloud upon cloud, step upon step, that tells of weather somewhere else and not here. The men accept this the way they accept the taste of salt. It is simply true. A young sailor, long-limbed and careful with questions, watches the captain's face and learns that command can be quiet and still be heard. Maintenance becomes the day's company. Someone oils the oarlocks, working the leather until it remembers softness. The sound changes from a small complaint to a small agreement. Someone checks seams between planks tar where tar should be, no cracking, no impatience hiding in the wood. A third lays out lines to dry, keeping the coils honest so they will not betray the hands that trust them later. Two men lean over the side to wash bowls and come up with faces damp and amused by the sea's easy generosity. A length of spare sail is folded and folded again until it becomes a pillow for someone's brief rest. The head that finds it does not apologize for sleep. When a fish breaks the surface and shows its coin flash of belly, no one reaches for a spear. The fish returns to its business, and the men return to theirs, which is not to disturb luck, when luck is content to sit quietly nearby. A gull chooses the top of the mast, considers the new arrangement of ropes, and decides there is nothing here to quarrel with. By midday the coastline is less than a memory. Heat rises off the deck in a forgiving shimmer, and then forgets to be important. The lookout names small things to himself to pass the hours. A cloud that keeps its shape too carefully, a slice of far water where the color changes, a shadow that might be a distant sail or a trick of the eye, and either way can be allowed to be undecided. He does not call these observations down. Not every noticing has to become a report. Beside him, a coil of rope settles into itself with the patience of an animal that knows it will be called upon later and is not offended by the weight. The boy who carried the lamp at dawn now carries bread, and the bread is still bread, and he is pleased by this stability in a world that so often asks him to hold a spear. In the afternoon, the wind shifts a finger width, and the sail answers, nothing more. Odysseus adjusts the rudder with the smallest movement, and the ship follows the thought as if it were its own. The sea runs in long, low hummocks that have no interest in surprise. The men's shirts darken with an honest sweat that dries and darkens again and dries again. Skin remembers salt and forgives it. Someone tells a short story about a market, a mule, a crooked stall of figs that tasted of dust and summer, and a kind lie told to a shopkeeper who deserved it. The men laugh softly because the joke is not important and therefore perfect. A name is mentioned, someone's uncle, someone's child, and then allowed to wander away, so it will not turn into longing before the day is finished. Toward evening, they find a cove of pale rock that curves like a quiet hand. The water inside lies flat as a polished board. Anchors go down with a gentle complaint of rope through wood. The hull settles into the bottom's softness as if remembering it. Sand takes footprints kindly and keeps them. The smell of time moves down from the low hillside and decides to stay. A small fire is encouraged into life with dry twigs and patience. Fish is cleaned with the method of people who have done this before and will do it again. Bread is sliced and passed. A story is told that is not about war, not even a little, and everyone listens because the voice telling it is calm and has no plan to hurry. The story ends in the middle, where the best stories often rest, and no one demands more. When eating is done, bowls are rinsed and left upside down on a flat stone that will still be warm when stars are fully awake. The strong-minded among them check the moorings again and test a knot as if it might have learned mischief since it was tied. Odysseus walks the length of the ship one last time, touching here and there not to correct, but to greet, and this too is a kind of seamanship. He looks west and says a prayer with no flourishes, for even winds, for lines that hold, for days that lie down quietly beside one another and do not argue. He thinks of Penelope without summoning her name, the way one thinks of the hearth when entering a room in winter. He sees a loom and a patient pattern. Hears the small domestic thunder of a shuttle knocking home. He imagines Telemachus as a shadow in a doorway that is almost his height now, and feels the ache of the distance, like a pulled thread. He will one day lay flat again. He does not let this sharpen into longing. He lets it be a guide rope, something to hold, not something to fight. Night gathers itself and makes the cove gentle. The watch is set with quiet instructions and a shared glance toward the easy stars. Cloaks become pillows. Sand gives it small, democratic comfort to every back. The sea hums under the keel in that cradle song it has kept since the first canoe slid from shore. A man turns over and settles. Another sighs. Someone mutters a short sentence in a dream, and then forgets it properly. Far out beyond the mouth of the cove, the water continues to behave. It lifts and lays itself down again in the same motion, like breathing you don't think about until you do. The lamp at the prow burns lower and steadies. The ship remembers being a tree, and then remembers being boards, and then decides it is a ship after all, and finds no reason to complain. The tide changes its mind, and then changes it back. A breeze visits the cove, and tastes the fire and leaves, satisfied that everything is in order. The man on watch walks the short length of deck, and teaches his feet the boards again, so they will know one another in the dark. He pauses to listen to the voices of insects in the low scrub on the slope, and to a single, persistent drip of water from a place that will dry soon enough. He thinks briefly and without pain of a courtyard at home where a jar sweats at this hour, and a dog dreams of a rabbit that does not need to be found. He adjusts the angle of a shield that is leaning where it might fall, and feels that he has done good work. The ship breathes with the tide, and the journey understands its shape, patient, particular, and free of hurry. Tomorrow will look like today, and that will be a blessing. The oars will lift and fall. The sail will answer. Maps will be redrawn in sand when needed and erased by the next wave without offense. The cup with the vine handles will wait in its chest for the table that suits it. Bread will be counted and shared. Oil will be measured and spared. Small repairs will be made before they can become arguments. For now there is only this steady dark, this kindly water, and the knowledge so simple it almost goes unnoticed that going home is mostly a matter of keeping on. And so the men sleep and the captain rests, and the sea does its practiced work beneath them. Stars take their places without discussion, and will hold them until dawn asks politely to trade. The fire finds its red heart and keeps it. The cove holds the ship the way a hand holds something fragile and wanted. If a dream arrives, it arrives quietly, offers a picture, an olive tree, a bent path, a door that sticks unless you lift while you pull, and then steps back to let the dreamer keep it. Somewhere a small stone rolls a finger's width and is content. The night is long enough, the boat is sure enough, and home, which is not yet here, is nearer in the way that matters. By decision, by patience, by the exact work of an oar going into water and coming out again, until morning becomes a fact. Morning arrives by degrees, the light laying itself over the water, until the sea remembers its color. The ship is already awake in the old ways. Ropes eased and tightened with small corrections, oars lifted and set down like the slow beating of a wide heart. A pot settling on the brazier to argue gently with the flame. The shoreline ahead grows out of haze, as if the day is developing a thought and finishing it with care. Fields appear before houses. Trees appear before streets. Then a town set back from the surf as though it likes to hear the sea speak without being asked to answer. The name of the place Ismarus moves quietly through the crew, shaped by different mouths into the same sound. We come ashore because sailors always come ashore when the water says yes, because bread is a better idea on land, because wood likes to remember it was once a tree, because feet that have been loyal to deck boards want to read the alphabet of Earth again. The beach is wide and sensible. Sand under the top crust is cool, and the wind arrives in handfuls that neither demand nor refuse. The ship takes her rest with the mild gratitude of a creature who understands that this, too, is part of work. At first there is only the ordinary exchange between ship and shore, the kind that makes a journey feel honest. Water skins are filled at a spring that lets itself out of the hill with the politeness of a good guest. The stone lip is worn to a shine by other hands that have asked and been answered. Fish are traded for fruit and a flat bread that folds without breaking, and someone finds a stall where jars of olives are set like dark suns in clean rows. Voices meet and separate, not as arguments but as agreements. This for that, today for tomorrow, a nod for a nod. The men, long at sea, move more quickly than the day requires. The day forgives them and remains slow. Odysseus counts as he always counts loaves, jars, oars, hours turning numbers into the kind of quiet that keeps trouble from thinking it is welcome. Work goes forward in sensible pieces. A group to fetch wood, a group to mend a seam, a group to carry back what was carried away. The sun is friendly, but watchful. The sea waits, saying nothing that cannot be said later, folding each wave neatly and placing it where it belongs. There is, as there is when fortune smiles too openly, a thin bright edge of temptation. Shade that asks you to stay 1 cup longer. A bench that fits the back so well it seems to know your name. The easy promise that tomorrow will look exactly like today, that the door of the day will hold itself open as long as we like. Men who worked without complaint the previous week now lift their straps and let them rest on their shoulders instead of biting into them. A second cup arrives because the first behaves so kindly. A story gains the kind of detail that means the teller has begun to remember the pleasure of telling more than the truth. The afternoon lengthens like a shadow, and, like a shadow, goes on lengthening when the sun has said enough. Odysseus walks the slope above the shore and reads the land as other men read letters. He sees fields that have been pleased by rain and careful hands, paths that make sense, not straight, but kind to feet, houses built to last longer than the men who built them, a pattern of habit that suggests people who are prepared to defend what they keep without having to announce it. He returns to the beach and says the words that wise captains say when the light is good and the holds are ready. We will leave now. He does not raise his voice. The gravity is inside the sentence, where it belongs. Some of the crew answer immediately, because hearing and obeying have grown into the same muscle for them. They coil, they carry, they check, they look to the ship as to a calendar that knows the date. Some of the crew do not hear, or hear and negotiate with themselves, which is a famous way of saying later. Later is a tender trap. It promises to be a bridge and becomes a wall. The town, surprised, and then not surprised, gathers itself with the steady dignity of people who have seen sailors before. Men appear along the ridge where the grass is darker. They do not shout. They do not need to. What follows is not a storm, but an unwise breeze, the kind that looks harmless until one remembers how light a ship can be when it is not yet in water. A scuffle is a rope dragged across a rough plank. A shove is a dish set down a little too hard. Words are thrown, then hands, then the kind of decisions that are too close to appetite to be called decisions at all. We pull our people back like line through a ring, and line scrapes when you pull it fast. So do men. The day which wished to remain simple learns again how easily it can be changed. We put off from the beach with work in our hands, and the knowledge that some hands will not lift again. The water, which offered itself so kindly in the morning, accepts our weight without judgment, as the sea often does when asked to keep a confidence. Odysseus stands at the stern and measures the distance between what was wise and what was done. He speaks no speech. He makes instead the captain's private ledger, a quiet inventory of losses completed as he completes all inventories, thoroughly, gently, with the understanding that each number is a life and therefore a world. The men take their places because there are still places to take, and when the oars enter the water there is that soft agreement that follows a lesson. For a while only the old music plays, the dip and lift that writes pale lines on the surface, the breath that rises and falls to keep time with the blade, the small corrections of a helmsman who has taught his hands to think. Behind us, Ismarus resumes the shape it had before we arrived, a field, a ridge, a suggestion of smoke, a town forgetting us on purpose, which is a skill, and one we will practice now as well. The wind, pleasant earlier, grows insistent, then sullen, then practical. Sails that slept at noon climb their masts and strain. Ropes remember why they were braided. The deck speaks in the familiar syllables from places where wood meets wood. We round a low point of land where the water darkens for reasons it keeps to itself. The hull answers the shoulder of a wave with the old, practiced curve. The prow decides there is nothing to prove and cuts where it must, lifts where it should, settles where it can. Odysseus sets his line of stars again, then loses them to a lid of cloud, and must think with his hands, which is an excellent way to think at sea. A touch here, a degree there. A hand on the tiller as one lays a hand on the shoulder of a friend who is almost, but not quite, walking too fast. Far off, a flicker behind curtains of rain suggests the gods are awake to our small confusion. The flicker considers thunder and declines. The matter is left to us, which is fair. At dusk we do the old, necessary work that places the dead among the living, without making the living forget their work. A cloak is folded in the shape of a man, and weighted with stones the earth will remember when they return. Names are spoken, as if they are being put back on a shelf in a remembered house. A cup is poured to make an ark of dark wine over water that had already decided to be grave. The sea keeps what is offered, and does not brag. Grief is kept tidy for the sake of the living, not because the dead demand tidiness. Grief knows the difference and accepts the rule. When the last name is said, the ship exhales, not because sorrow is finished, but because the oars must enter the sea again. The men sit with the posture of people who have worked. The night lays its first small stars where a ceiling is needed. The wind, having made its point, steadies into something we can use. Darkness is a patient visitor who knows the stairs. It does not rush down. It arrives at the correct speed for the work of night. On deck the watch is set with brief, specific instructions, the kind that respect the mind and do not crowd it. Keep the wind on this cheek unless it changes. Count to a certain number between glances aft. Call if the stars close a certain distance. Wake me if the sound under the bow shifts from sing to hum, from hum to knock. The rest of us lie on benches and boards and on the good, forgiving surface of the world that has been called by many names and answers to all of them. Someone's cloak finds a second life as a pillow. Someone else's shoulder becomes the soft wall a tired head needs. The sea makes its low, unambitious music against the hull, a metronome for thinking that prefers not to think. Far off, lightning opens and closes a book it was reading to someone else. Here, our page is untroubled. The thin hour that belongs to sailors neither night nor morning, both the time when ropes remember the shape of hands passes and neat squares of attention. The helmsman steers by feel when the stars are hidden, and by star when the feel would grow proud without help. The lookout names small things to himself, as if rehearsing being a poet, and then puts the words away, because the work does not require words tonight. A cooler stripe on the water, A scent that means a reed bed on a coast we will not visit. The anyway of a gull who chooses us as a path for a time and then does not. Below the benches, a bowl knocks once where it did not knock earlier, is moved 3 finger breadths forward, and learns its manners. Above, a rope that thought about chafing is given leather to think about instead. Even at sea, most problems are polite enough to be solved by noticing. By first gray, the coast of Ismarus is an arrangement of darker darknesses at the edge of seeing, then a memory that the mind files under do not forget to remember. We are not chased because we are already gone. We are not celebrated because we did nothing worth celebration. We are simply moving, which is the grace granted to those who have learned again how to go. Morning returns with its basket of small tasks and finds us ready to carry them. The pot reheated, the bread divided in the learned pattern, the tally resumed where it paused, the jokes retold in their shorter, better forms. Odysseus draws a new map on the lid of his mind, adjusting for what has been learned and what has been lost. What he wants does not change, only the way he means to carry it. The lesson of Ismarus is folded and put away where lessons belong, not displayed as a medal, not hidden like a shame, but kept in the drawer one opens each morning for the tools of the day. Leaving, we remember, is an art made of 3 strands: skill, timing, and obedience to the part of the heart that knows how to listen when comfort speaks too loudly. The men translate this into their own languages. Fewer cups, quicker coiling, the habit of tying what was left loose. No one announces a rule. The deck suggests it, and hands agree. Between strokes, an older sailor teaches a younger one the trick of easing a knot with the back of a thumbnail instead of the edge of a knife, and the younger man learns 2 lessons at once, the technique and the patience that keeps knives sheathed. We talk of small successes, a seam that held where it might have thought about failing, a blister that decided to be skin again, the way the ship's shadow makes a traveling shade for the fish that follow, because they enjoy pretending to be thinking creatures too. Before noon, a breeze comes from the correct place at the correct speed, and the sail relaxes into a shape that looks like gratitude. The ropes sing under load, but do not complain. The rudder, guided by a hand certain, without being hard, keeps the ship in the narrow, invisible lane between too much and too little. We speak of simple things, how the spring tasted at the hill, how the olives at the stall were arranged like planets, how a man with a crooked laugh made the fruit seem sweeter because his laughter had no sharpness in it. We do not yet speak of coasts where flowers will ask us to forget our errands, or of a cave kept by one listening eye, or of a bag of winds tied shut in good faith and opened in bad timing, or of a year that passes like an afternoon, or of a road under a patient sky where the dead speak gently and then fade, or of a song too beautiful to trust, or of a gate kept by 2 shadows, or of cattle on a golden island that must not be touched. Those belong to later pages, and later pages will open themselves. When the sun stands where sailors measure the day, Odysseus touches the tiller once more, a small courtesy between old companions, and turns his face toward the long water. Behind us, a town resumes its own steady life fields that will be harvest if the weather remains reasonable, paths that will carry feet for the same errands they carried last year, houses that will outlast their builders, and then outlast their builders' children. Before us, the sea lays down blue pages, one after another, for a hand that has learned again to turn them at the proper time. The ship breathes, the men settle. The wake braids and unbraids itself as if practicing, remembering, and forgetting in equal measure. And the wind, newly respectful, walks with us rather than ahead of us, as if it, too, has understood the lesson that comforts must be left while they are still comfortable, that departures made on time are a kind of mercy, and that the quiet art of leaving is itself a way of going home. Morning takes the sky back without hurry. The sea is a plain again, stitched with faint lines our oars keep making and unmaking. A long, even swell moves under us like breathing we've borrowed from something larger. By midday, a low coastline rises where the horizon had been blank, pale sand, a slope of grass the wind combs carefully, a scatter of shrubs that seem to prefer roundedness to height. The color of the place is gentle, straw and honey and the kind of green that likes to keep its voice low. We aim for the sensible gap in the shore where the water shows a changed color and small waves turn over neatly. The ship enters as if welcomed by a host who prefers to speak with actions. We beach the hull high enough to be certain it will not second-guess us. The sand here is fine as flour and cool just beneath the crust. Beyond the tide line, a path has been pressed by many light feet, and along it grow plants with narrow leaves and small, pale flowers you might overlook if you came seeking drama. The air smells faintly sweet, not thick, not heavy, just a reminder that there are places where the wind learns kindness. Farther inland, a few low houses sit with their doors open. They appear to belong not to people, but to the weather. The men stretch the way men stretch after days at sea, shoulders rolled, ribs widening to accept land. We fill skins at a shallow spring that flows as if it has nowhere urgent to be. A few figures approach along the path, unarmed, unafraid, their hands raised not high, not low exactly where greeting is easiest. They bring food that looks like fruit and doesn't insist on being called that. Pale flesh, petal-thin skins, a sheen that is more suggestion than shine. They offer it with the steady calm of people who have never needed to bargain. Their language lingers on vowels. When they say welcome, the word sounds like a hammock. We answer with what sailors always answer, thanks, a smile, a glance to the captain that asks and is answered. Small bites are allowed. Work continues. The first taste is honest in its sweetness, closer to blossom than to sugar. It is cool on the tongue and warmer in the throat, and it sets down a small cushion somewhere inside the chest, the place where urgent thoughts usually pace. Men who have earned rest feel rest arrive and do not object. Tasks proceed at a gentler tempo. Ropes are coiled and stay coiled. Skins are filled and do not drip. Someone mends a seam and finds that the needle knows its way without being hurried. A man who is usually first to ask for orders discovers that he is content to follow the shape of the day instead. Another man who keeps a private ledger of worries notices that the numbers in his head have begun to blur into each other in a way that seems not only acceptable, but wise. Odysseus watches this with the affection of a father who sees strong sons finally sleep. He says nothing at first, because rest has a right to a few quiet minutes before the world resumes its lists. The people of this shore sit with us as neighbors do when speaking is optional. They show us how their plant grows low along the ground, how its roots are shallow, how it survives by offering ease to the creatures that might otherwise step too hard. Their hands move in circles as they talk, drawing pictures where a leaf becomes a boat and a boat becomes a bed, and a bed becomes a promise to return. They do not sell. They do not argue. They do not warn. They do what many gentle places do. They suggest. A second portion is offered and accepted by those with the lightest guard. A third is tasted by those who like to be certain of a good thing. Around us the day sighs and agrees to be longer than it would have been elsewhere. The change when it comes is not a change at all, only the soft erasing of edges. A name rises to the mind and then chooses to sit down before it reaches the lips. A plan arrives at the doorway and removes its shoes and decides to remain where it is. The oars, which have always been so sure of themselves, look like objects that could be used later if later wishes. A group of men walk a little way down the beach and then forget to keep walking. They sit on their heels, then on the flat of their backs, and look up into a sky that obliges them by carrying nothing weighty. One of them laughs, not because anything is funny, but because laughter is a fine way to breathe. Another begins a story and finds that the first sentence is adequate, as complete as any story needs to be. The tide, which was coming in, decides to arrive more gently. Odysseus feels the small tug in the fabric of the day the way a careful helmsman feels it change in the wind before it touches the sail. He moves among the men and speaks their names and notes how some lift their heads with the speed he knows, and how others smile, as if the name is a pleasant sound but not a personal address. He asks a question that will provoke any useful impatience. Who has checked the leather at the oarlocks? And hears sensible answers from some, kind and unrequired observations from others. A man who can coil rope to a fist's width without looking at his hands now finds beauty in letting the rope lie like river water. Another, whose talent is to keep the count of food as steady as a timed lap, remembers the shapes of numbers, but prefers their company to their order. These are not failures. These are soft rearrangements. But soft rearrangements at sea will grow teeth. He gathers the petty officers with a glance and a tilt of the head, and walks them 3 ship lengths from the rest, to speak where words can sit up straight. The talk is low and practical. We will collect our men, we will return them to the benches, we will leave gently and with thanks. There will be no scolding. The plant does its work by kindness, and we will answer with the same. If a man cannot stand, we will help him stand. If a man prefers the warm sand to the deck, we will prefer him to safety. The men nod because they respect the shape of a plan that has made itself rounder than usual, like a cushion passed beneath a sleeping head. We walk back into the sweet hum of the place and begin the work of gathering. It is not the work of force. It is the work of turning faces toward the ship, of reminding feet what walking does, of offering water not as correction but as company. For a man who answers, in a moment, we agree that a moment is good, and then we make the moment occur now by standing up together. For another who has started a sentence and wishes to keep starting it until the sun goes down, we finish the sentence with him and then help him up while he is pleased with the ending. 2 men that were once boys together have placed themselves under a shrub and are discussing the virtues of shade as if shade were a cousin. We invite the cousin to follow us to the boat, and shade obliges by carrying itself along in the shape of our bodies. There is laughter that does not resist being guided. There are hands that prefer to be held, and then remember that holding is what they have always done. Rope, oar, bowl, friend. At the boats, we ease our companions aboard as if boarding were a form of rest, which today it is. We place them at their benches and secure light lines at their waists, the way a mother ties a ribbon so a child will not wander in a busy market. The knots are the kind that come apart when asked politely. Water is handed. Bread is set where a hand will find it, and the plant's taste is not mentioned, because courtesy is still courtesy even when addressing forgetfulness. A man looks up, surprised to see the curve of the gunwale near his shoulder, and then smiles because the curve is beautiful. Another touches the oar and greets it as if it were an old acquaintance he means to know better by and by. The people of this shore do not argue with our leaving. They do not grasp sleeves or call out in borrowed names. They stand where the sand ends and the grass begins and lift their palms in a gesture that has as much farewell in it as welcome. A woman steps forward and places into Odysseus's hand a small plate of dried stems, light as a promise. He bows and lays it where captains lay things that do not belong to war. The shore is so polite in its distance that even our footprints look as if they meant to be erased. When the keel takes the water and the first lift comes under us, several of our newly seated men sigh in that satisfied way that belongs to beds and boats and other honest structures. Out beyond the shallows, the world grows taller again. The color under the hull turns from glass to blue, and the taste of the air forgets sweetness and remembers salt. Work returns in the kind order that is kind to men. A command, an answer, a motion that brings more comfort than any cushion. The oars enter the sea. The oars depart the sea. Rhythm sits down beside us and becomes the best of friends. The lines we tied loosen and are coiled away without comment. The men they held look around as people look around a room they woke in before they meant to, a moment of pleasant uncertainty, a hand checking for a familiar cloak, a laugh that means embarrassment without pain. We point out the bow, the sky, the distance, and let those ordinary nouns do the work that long speeches spoil. Memory returns the way tide returns along a gentle shore, first around the ankles, then at the knees, then higher, and there is no resentment in it. A man asks, as if joining a conversation he left only an instant ago, whether the spare leather has been cut for the starboard oarlocks. Another asks about the cup with the vine handles, and whether it has been safely placed for evenings when stories need a vessel. A third asks nothing, but his hands roam the length of the oar he holds, reacquainting themselves with the nicks and smooth places, the small history of work that wood remembers. Odysseus says very little. He stands with the tiller light in his grasp and adds only what the day requires. Here, a correction. There, a reminder that bread will be passed in due time. The wind freshens from a friendly quarter and teaches the sail a roundness it had forgotten for a day. The sound at the bow sharpens half a note in that cheerful way that keeps a helmsman awake without waking everyone else. The men find their old tempo as if it had been waiting on the bench all along. One looks back toward the receding island and seems to search his pockets for a reason to care, and then shakes his head at his own politeness. Of course it was pleasant. Of course it was a place to leave. Another, more private in his thoughts, touches the line that had lightly held him, and tightens his belt instead, converting one form of safety into another. The ship keeps her manners, neither pressing the water nor asking it to do more than accompany. Toward evening, the Lotus is only a footnote the body will finish reading by morning. Hunger has returned in useful amounts. Thirst behaves. Tasks that had seemed optional remember that they are customary, which is to say reassuring. Odysseus speaks once to the crew in the tone he saves for good lessons finished. He does not name the plant. He names the shape of the danger, the kind that arrives wearing comfort, the kind that offers to carry your pack and then asks you to set it down, the kind that calls your name slowly until your name agrees to be any name. He reminds us gently that some shores must be praised from a distance, and some ease must be turned into story before it turns us into something else. The men nod, each at his own speed, and find a place for the thought among other tools. Supper is simple and therefore welcome. The pot gives out a steam that has nothing mysterious in it. The bread measures itself into hands that have earned it. A cup goes around and returns with enough for the last man who forgot to believe there would be enough. The deck feels right under backs. The mast leans and is steady. Above, the first stars find their familiar corners and set out the old roots. Those who were most charmed by the shore fall asleep first, which is its own kind of cure. Those who kept the count keep the watch. The sea hums in its old key. A gull that has no business this far from land tries the air above us, decides it does not care for the conversation, and turns back. Before sleep, Odysseus looks down the length of the ship and sees everything in its place, not stiff and inspected, but correct in the way a house feels correct when every useful thing has chosen the shelf it prefers. He thinks of Ithaca without the ache that names insist on. He lets it be a series of familiar weights in the pocket. A key, a smooth stone, a length of cord. He thinks of the men and their lines, of how names can be tied to bodies like light lines to a belt, not to restrain, but to be sure no one wanders while he dreams. He thinks of the shore we left and wishes it no harm and no change. It will keep offering what it offers. We will keep moving, because moving is how this story stays kind. Night travels toward us at the speed it always has. The wake unbraids behind and decides not to remember itself. The lamp at the prow makes its little sun and brings it quietly along. We pass the hour where the sea goes glassy, and then pass that into the hour where it remembers to be made of moving pieces. The helmsman adjusts by degrees too small to earn their own names. The ship keeps breathing, and the chapter of soft forgetting closes itself, leaving us with the right sort of memory, not the sweetness on the tongue, but the sentence Odysseus's hands have known for years hold lightly, do not let go. The island looked ordinary from the water-low hills, a wash of pale grass, a fringe of rock shaped by patient waves. We came ashore because sailors always do when the shoreline holds still and seems to wait. The tide laid us down kindly. Boats watched from ledges with the settled curiosity of creatures that have never needed to hurry. Far inland, smoke rose in a single polite line and told us that someone kept a hearth and knew how to keep it. We walked a path that had already chosen its destination. The ground kept the round prints of broad-hoofed sheep and the smaller, lively notes of kids that had been counted and counted again. The air smelled of milk and salt, and a leaf we later learned was olive. The two scents agreed with each other without trying. The mouth of the cave was not a mouth at all, but a doorway made by great hands, smooth where shoulders had brushed, pale where sun had been allowed to enter, dark within the way a storehouse is dark on purpose. Inside was an order that would have pleased any quartermaster. Racks held cheeses turned to their correct faces. Wide bowls for milk waited like moons along a shelf. Pens were separated by size and voice. Lambs here, kids there, larger sheep in a space where they could consider their day. Everything smelled of its used wood, wool, whey, stone, and the smell was a clean one. We did what sailors do when presented with good sense. We admired it quietly and then admired it again after eating a small, respectful meal from provisions we had carried ourselves. Odysseus looked at the order and saw the man who had made it. One can read the shape of a mind in the way it stores food. The owner arrived as evening arrived, with the same confidence. He was larger than any of us, but the size was not a threat until it needed to be. It was the size of a hillside, or a millstone, or a door that never sticks. He guided his flock in with a staff that would have been a mast for us, and set a round stone into the doorway that was as broad as our ship's sail is high. It settled with a sound like something correct being returned to its place. He milked by habit, singing under his breath in a voice that hummed the cave into a room. He counted the kids with a finger that could have covered any one of our faces. He missed none. It was a house, and we were guests in it before we had the right to be. There is an old rule that says a fire, once shared, becomes a sort of agreement. We relied on it and spoke the sailors' welcome bread, a little wine, the courtesy of names. The giant, whose single eye held us all comfortably inside it, listened without blinking. He asked very few questions, the way a man asks few questions of a sudden rain. It is happening. One need not interrogate it. Our portion of cheese and milk came without ceremony. Our portion of fear arrived more quietly, and stood near the wall, undecided. Odysseus answered what was asked and kept what did not need to be volunteered. He set the small gift of dark wine where a big hand could find it, and did not hurry that hand toward it. Night makes caves honest. Firelight chooses what it will praise and leaves the rest to be true without witnesses. We learned, as all travelers do, the difference between hospitality and storage. The stone in the doorway did not move. The shepherd's comfort was not the comfort of visitors. There was talk as simple as water poured from one jar to another, and then there was sleep that belonged to the owner of the room more than to us. Odysseus lay awake where he could see both the door stone and the man who had set it. He counted breaths, then he counted options, and discovered that the second number wanted to be smaller than the first. In the morning the order resumed, milking, sorting, the quiet mathematics of a household that feeds itself. The giant rolled the stone aside by himself, guided his flock to pasture, and closed the cave again with the gentleness a man uses when he does not want to wake a child. We were left with air, stone, shelves, racks, and time. Time can be a tool if the hand is careful. Odysseus walked the perimeter of the cave the way a mason walks a wall to feel where it bears well and where it complains. He found a length of olive wood not yet turned into anything useful, a trunk cut and set aside to season, as all good wood must. He followed it with his palm, measuring its promise. He looked at the fire and saw its other use. When the shepherd returned, the day had already made up its mind to be like other days. Odysseus offered the wine with both hands and named it properly. The giant lifted the bowl and was surprised to find that something so small could make such a patient warmth in the chest. He smiled for the first time, and the cave learned a new shape for the shadows. He drank again with the satisfaction of a man whose work has earned it, and again after that with the curiosity of those who meet a new tool and imagine what it might make. It was not a trick. It was a courtesy accepted several times. Names have work to do in rooms like this. Odysseus set his name down on the table of the evening, and then, when asked for another, offered a useful one. Nobody. It is a name that behaves well in the dark. The shepherd laughed the way a large man laughs when language pleases him, and repeated it until the word was friendly. Sleep comes earlier to those who have labored honestly. It also comes earlier to those who have been kindly warmed. The giant slept. The fire shrank to a steady red decision. The cave listened for instructions. We worked in the way that quiet work is done, together with little talk, and with tools that are made while one is already using them. The olive trunk became a stake by stages, bark stripped, shaft smoothed, point carved true, and then truer. The fire became a partner, lending the heat that hardens intention. When the moment arrived, we moved as people move who have already discussed every part of a task and have decided to keep the discussion out of the way. In our telling, this is not a scene of shouting or bright pain. It is a scene of a door being persuaded to close that should have been closed by courtesy. The room took a long breath in and then let it out in a long, rough exhale. The shepherd woke to a darkness he could not argue with. He reached for answers and found only stone and wool and the limits of his own house. Neighbors, hearing trouble, called to ask if help was needed. Language did what it sometimes does when it chooses us. It kept its promise. "Nobody," he shouted, and the neighbors, trusting grammar and the hour, went back to their work. Inside, we kept ours. Panic is a poor craftsman. Odysseus refused to hire it. He set the stake aside, quieted the fire with a little ash, and taught the men their next tasks with 3 words and a nod each. The sheep, unused to loudness, returned to the slow chewing that is their confidence. The cave, for all its size, felt smaller, because plans take up space while they are being born. Dawn returns even to places that swear they are finished with light. The shepherd, careful now and angry only in the way a storm is angry generally, without names rolled the stone aside and set himself at the mouth of the cave, hands out to read what touched them. Woe came, woe went. He listened to the language of fleece and bone, and was sure he would hear an unfamiliar syllable if it tried to pass. Odysseus tied each man beneath the largest rams, belly to wool, fingers in fleece, breath swallowed when the giant's hand traveled the curve of a back down to an old familiar spine. Sheep smell of lanolin and work. They carry the day's weather in their coats. They also carry men if asked politely and arranged correctly. We left in the oldest way people leave danger, slowly in order without announcing the moment at which leaving actually becomes leaving. The rams shuffled and were counted by touch. The giant's hands read only what they had always read: fat fleece, good weight, a day of pasture to be earned. Our men moved with the animals and learned again the wisdom of patience that eats no bread and spends no coin. When the last of us had met the light, we did not cheer. We breathed. The beach was the same beach. The water had kept our shape and was willing to take it again. The ship, sensible, had waited. Ropes remembered hands. Oars remembered water. We became ourselves at our correct size. There is a line in the story and other tellings where a man calls his real name to the shore and praises himself to the wind. We will say only that language can travel farther than one expects, and that the sea does not need to be told where sound has been. The hillside answered with a weighty silence, and then with a thud of something large that found water rather than wood. Waves climbed over our gunwales in workmanlike amounts. We lifted through them the way a cart lifts through ruts it has survived before. Odysseus stood at the stern with the look he keeps for lessons already paid for. He said nothing about pride. He said everything he needed to with the set of his hand on the tiller. Offshore, the island returned to the color islands used when they mean to be left alone. The sheep spread themselves across their familiar mathematics. The smoke rose as if nothing worth speaking of had happened, and perhaps to the island that was true. A day had begun and would end. Mouths would be fed. A stone would be moved and moved again. On our deck, bread went around and wine did not. The men spoke in the short sentences used by people who have learned again what walls are for and why doors need latches. We checked lines that had not failed. We thanked wood that had not splintered. We stored the memory not as a trophy, not as a wound, but as a tool to be reached for before sleep. Evening softened the sea into something that helped. The wake stitched itself briefly and forgot itself as usual. A gull came out to reconsider us and changed its mind in the way gulls do, without apology. The men settled as men settle when their bodies decide to do the kind thing for their minds. Odysseus looked along the benches and counted, not to test the number, but to bless it. He thought, as captains do, of the next day's water, the next day's wind, the next day's food, and of the small doorways in fate that can be found if one walks slowly with one's hand out. Night welcomed us without questions. The lamp at the prow made its modest circle and carried it forward, and the stars took their positions above a sea that had agreed to be simple until morning. We lay down inside the safe arithmetic of a ship that knows how to divide itself into watches and multiply its courage by silence. The island with the cave receded, not by distance alone, but by the mind's healthy habit of letting the day close. We slept in rows. The ocean held us, and the story, now larger by one careful escape, turned the page by itself. The island received us like a careful bowl set upon the sea, cliffs in a near circle, a single break where tidy waves folded inward and invited us through. Inside that ring, the air felt arranged, no stray gusts. No sudden moods, only a steady breeze that behaved as if it had been asked before it answered. Houses stood on sensible slopes with thick walls, tight roofs, and courtyards that kept footsteps and returned them softer. We were met by people who carried calm the way others carry weapons. Water came in cups with rims worn honest by many mouths. Bread that had learned patience from long rising. Salt fish that remembered the net but did not complain. Their leader, broad-shouldered the way a door is broad, greeted Odysseus without parade. He asked not where we had fought, but how we meant to rest. And when he named himself Keeper of Winds, he did so in a voice that trusted the island to make the claim convincing. Days arranged themselves the way sensible days do when work is properly stacked. Each morning the keeper walked the cliff path and looked out at the plain of water that never holds still, turning his head as if listening to a conversation carried across distances we could not see. His hand would sketch a shape in air, and he'd nod the small nod of a craftsman who sees a join fit exactly. Each afternoon he led us into a hall where jars stood in ordered rank, some tall as men, some no higher than the knee, everyone lidded and roped with a knot a sailor would respect. The cords were not ornament. They were sentences tied in a language the weather obeys. Hospitality here had a quiet pattern. Modest food, clear talk, stories exchanged without boasting, because exaggeration is a kind of rudeness in a room that governs air. When Odysseus spoke of Ithaca, the keeper listened in the manner of one who knows that a destination sits up straighter when it hears its name said kindly, and he asked questions the way one checks a chart briefly, to be certain, then not again. On the third evening, strolling the long curve of the inner shore, where the wind seemed to practice its best manners, the keeper spoke a simple fact as if reciting a law older than stone. Wind is a servant that remembers every order given, so be careful which ones you give. Then he brought out an oxhide bag, thick and supple, smelling of salt and careful work, its mouth bound by a clever silver cord that tightened on itself when persuaded and relaxed only when persuaded again. He set the weight in Odysseus's arms in the old way, both men seeing the same object at the same time. Here, he said, are the winds you do not want. Keep them closed, and the one wind you do will walk with you until home has nothing more to prove. We left at dawn under a sky that had agreed to be useful. The keeper lifted his palm to the air as a man lifts it to a trained animal, and the breeze came forward like a horse that likes its work. The sail rounded. The ship felt taller without rising. The bag lay under a folded cloak near the mast, heavy in the right way, quiet the way all good tools are quiet when not in use, and men took their places with that pleasant certainty that comes when a deck announces it will be a simple day if we answer simply. Sea miles unrolled as if someone were paying them out from a neat, well-coiled line. The wake stitched and unstitched behind us with proper humility. The course lay steady. The water kept its small promises. We measured the distance to home in tasks rather than miles, 3 mendings, 5 watches, 2 loaves, because such arithmetic is kinder to a mind than charts that pretend to be swift. Nights behaved well, stars hung where they should, and stayed. The watch saw what it should see and let pass what could pass. Odysseus held the tiller with his usual lightness, and an hour at a time allowed his mind to practice the furniture of Ithaca. A low wall holding afternoon warmth, a hallway where a door clicks unless you lift while you pull, a patch of time the bees have claimed, and the bees are welcome to. He never named these aloud. He counted them the way he counts oars accurately, without needing to share. Then came a noon so moderate that even caution grew drowsy. The sail wore its best shape, the helm asked for little. The water lay in broad, manageable pieces. Odysseus, who had slept near the bag every night, without arguing with sleep, closed his eyes beside it for a brief, earned moment. Curiosity arrived in soft voices, as it often does when nothing insists. Not to open, only to look, someone proposed. Not to meddle, only to understand the knot, said another. The silver cord is beautiful work, observed a third, and beautiful work likes to be admired closely. Nothing is being done, only seen, added a fourth whose virtue is accuracy. A knot is a kind of language, and untying feels like reading. Fingers follow loops laid with intention. Feel where cord crosses cord like sentence on sentence. Find where a pull would tighten foolishly, and where it would loosen kindly. The first tug was small, and the knot respected itself. The second was reasonable. The third was the kind a tired man makes when he is tired of not knowing. The bag remembered that a mouth is a door. Wind came out in its many dialects. A stiff northerly that thinks in straight lines, a hurried westerly that prefers to arrive early, a cool draft that likes corners, a warm push that misjudges distance on purpose. The sail changed its mind. The rudder asked for two hands. Lines that had been resting preferred to work very much and all at once. Odysseus woke into work and did not search for speeches. Cloth came down to smaller sizes. Sheets were shifted. Men were set to numbers that waves respect. The ship rose and fell as arithmetic, not drama. Heights answered by weights, motions paired with other motions. But the mixed winds had better numbers. They braided themselves into strands our loom did not possess, and pulled where we had asked them not to pull. The island we had left became a suggestion on the horizon, then a certainty, then a wall of cliffs again, as if the sea had been folded and set down in the same place. We entered the circular harbor not as beggars with noise, but as men who had carried a fragile thing and watched it slip, prepared to name the slip without shouting. The keeper looked at our faces, at the bag under its cloak that no longer weighed what it had weighed, and asked a few brief questions that drew the shape of the truth. He did not scold. "The gods are speaking to you," he said, "and it is not my place to answer for them." Water was given, bread was shared. No second gift was offered because a host may give only what is his to give, and some lessons belong to the sea. We slept a short, tidy sleep, the kind that admits what happened and does not pretend to erase it, and in the morning went out again through the same break, smaller for what we had learned and larger for having learned it. Work reasserted itself in its proper order, sails set for ordinary weather, oars pleased to be useful, coils put away with a neatness that keeps trouble from thinking it is welcome. The empty oxhide lay where it had lain, lighter in weight but heavy in meaning, a thing to keep not because it would help us, but because it would keep us from asking the wrong favors. The men taught the lesson where tools live. Do not open what wisdom has closed. Do not borrow weather from a future you have not yet earned. Tie knots in your mouth as carefully as on your lines. Conversation returned to the good nouns bread, rope, watch, because those are the nouns that carry a day from morning to evening without spilling. By nightfall the keeper's cliffs were a pale story at the edge of the world. Stars took their places without discussion, and the wind, respectful again, walked with us rather than ahead, as if it too had understood that departures made on time are a kind of mercy. Odysseus touched the tiller the way one pats a shoulder after a hard truth, and let Ithaca remain where true destinations are most useful, near enough to guide, far enough to keep us careful. The wake braided and unbraided behind us. The lamp at the prow kept its modest circle. We laid down inside the ship's safe arithmetic and allowed the lesson to become strength without asking it to keep announcing its name. The coastline drew itself with a sure hand, two long arms of rock reaching out into the sea and curving inward until they nearly touched, leaving between them a doorway no wider than a ship and a half. Beyond that narrow, polite opening, the water lay smooth as oil and dark as polished wood, a quiet bowl that promised rest. The cliffs rose cleanly on both sides, their faces showing old vertical lines where rain had learned to walk. Sparse pines stood in thoughtful places, as if placed by someone who likes order. Our wake folded itself away when we entered, as though the harbor preferred not to keep records. Voices dropped by agreement. The oars took their time and were pleased with the result. It was a good place for evening, or it looked that way from the mouth. We slipped inside and found a stillness that had ideas of its own. Sound changed character. The small talk of water against hull came back to us in a rounder voice. A gull's call was ironed flat, becoming a line and not a point. The cliffs kept the wind from making choices, and air settled along the stone like a shawl. We saw mooring stones shaped by patient hands. We saw ladders that had learned the habits of tides. We saw little platforms where fish could be cleaned without their scales taking offense. Farther in, houses stood high and looked down with the comfort of balconies that had watched many returns. Smoke rose in tidy threads that did not wander. The light, already thinking about dusk, became amber where it touched water, slate where it remembered rock, and honey where it found the hulls. Everything suggested that a captain could say here, and the ship would agree. Odysseus, who loves good order, loves it most when it volunteers its name. He nodded at the workmanship, the angle of a peg, the thickness of a cleat, the fairness of a curve, and then kept his face thoughtful in that way that means he is counting more than objects. A harbor that quiet at the day's end is a courtesy. A harbor that quiet at the world's end is a question. He set a cautious rhythm. Anchors to kiss the bottom but not sleep there. Oars left inboard but not buried. Sails gathered but not blinded. Lines coiled where a hand could find them in 3 heartbeats. 3 men went ashore by the obvious stare-good men for errands, shoulders that understand carrying, eyes that speak in complete sentences when they return. Ask for water, he said. Ask the name of the wind, ask how nights are handled. Come back with the flavor of the place. They climbed toward streets that had been swept by earlier steps. Shadows from the cliff tops had lengthened enough to be friendly, not enough to pretend to be night. From below we watched them in the way sailors watch counting, without moving lips, learning a landscape by the pace of their feet, measuring welcome by whether the doors they pass remain doors or become mouths. People appeared along the high path, not hurried, not slow, each with that practiced way of standing which means a town is accustomed to its own comfort. A woman in a doorway lifted a lamp to see faces, and then lowered it, neither beckoning nor refusing. A man with a staff paused where streets meet and drew a short line in the dust, as if keeping score in a game he meant to win slowly. The smell of cooking rose from a court somewhere, and found us, not as invitation, but as the fact that dinners were occurring on schedule. Evening, which is usually a companion, felt taller here, as if it had been given a chair at the head of the table. The scouts vanished around a corner that belonged to their task. We read the side of the cliff for messages: bird flight, ash drift, a thin sound like a pot set down too carefully, and found none that insisted on meaning. The harbor's surface had almost no memory. A tossed chip of wood moved out, and then back again as though rethinking departure. Odysseus stood at the stern and let the silence speak until it began repeating itself. Then he said the sentence that put small wheels inside big ones. "We will be ready to be ready." Lines came a little nearer to hand. The long boat was nudged into the water, so it wouldn't have to learn swimming in a hurry. Bread was passed along the benches and eaten as if the act were a drill. Nobody raised a voice. Even caution chose soft shoes. When the three men returned, they returned in a straight line, which is eloquence. Their feet made the sound of feet that have consulted with their owners and reached a quick agreement. They did not run, they arrived efficiently. "Water is plentiful," said the first, which can mean many things. "Names are few," said the second, which means more. The third, who does not waste nouns, looked at the cliff tops, and then at the narrow mouth we had used, and his silence drew a line we all could see. Above us, movement gathered in places where observation is comfortable. Not an army, not even an argument. Just the weight of attention that wishes to be heavier. Dusk finished its work of dimming the detail that makes strangers into neighbors. The harbor, which had been a bowl, disclosed how bowls can become lids. Departure, like docking, is an art that rewards rehearsal. Orders went out as if they had been spoken earlier and were now only being remembered. Anchors rose without complaint. Men pulled with a care that does not splash. Oars dipped together, wrote their pale lines, erased them, and wrote again. The ship turned its thought toward the narrow door, and the door, which had looked so simple at noon, measured us. From the heights, voices tried the air. A stone came down and chose water instead of wood, which was generous of it. The water accepted the news with a heavy circle that lifted and set us once, twice, and then lost interest. Another weight followed, and another not precisely aimed, as if the throwers preferred their work to be remembered generally rather than particularly. We kept our shape. The bow found the seam between reflections and made a seam of its own. At the throat of the harbor, the sea outside spoke in its broad dialect again, and the ship answered, relieved to be back in a conversation that doesn't raise its eyebrows. A push of wind met us from the right quarter, the kind that seems to have been standing nearby with its hand raised, waiting to be called upon. The oars shipped, the sail climbed. Ropes remembered the manners learned on better days. Behind us, the cliffs agreed to become cliff-colored once more. Houses returned to the business of smoke and lamp. The water inside flattened back to its preferred forgetfulness. No one on board offered anger, which would have given the place a rent-free room in our thoughts. Odysseus said only what was useful. We keep to open roadsteads until the sky is in on the secret. We trust the wind more than the walls. We measure harbors by their doors, not their floors. Night took us in with the competence it saves for those who leave on time. The wake braided itself, unbraided, and then decided to rest. The men breathed in rows, and the ship matched their rhythm from keel to masthead in that old exchange of kindness between wood and lungs. A pot was set to warm a simple broth that called no attention to its virtue. Stars found their corners and kept them. Odysseus stood a while longer, hand easy on the tiller, and allowed a lesson to take its seat without being asked to speak. The sea resumed its patient arithmetic. Distance subtracted by strokes, fear divided by work, hope multiplied by small, correct acts. Somewhere behind us a harbor kept its shape for other evenings. Ahead the open water wrote its long, legible lines. We followed them, quietly, toward the next page. After the harbor with the narrow throat, and the evening that wished to sit heavier than it should, the sea gave us a day that behaved low swell, weaned with good manners, sky thinking neatly from horizon to horizon. Toward afternoon a green island rose out of that calm, its center lifted like a shoulder, its edges soft by coves that looked as if they had practiced receiving guests. Pines kept their own counsel along the ridges. Smoke rose in a line that neither hurried nor strayed. We beached where the sand understood boats, and let the hull rest while the men learned the ground with their feet again. The place had a smell of time and clean water, and something else in orderedness that did not come from weather alone. We filled skins at a spring that announced itself plainly, and ate bread in the good way, without discussion, as if the mouth had finally won its quiet argument with the day. From a rise above the cove, we saw a house standing where land becomes opinion, a hall of stone fitted tightly, a roof that shed rain the way a duck sheds it, a courtyard swept into a promise. Between us and the house moved animals that did not exactly move like animals. Wolves whose tails forgot to warn, lions who blinked as if the sun belonged to them, and we were acceptable furniture in it. They did not snarl. They sat the way faithful dogs sit when a master has asked them to hold the door by being kind. We sent a party toward the hall with the ordinary errands: ask for water, trade for salt, bring back the name the place uses for itself. Eurylochus kept a few of us back and watched the path with the suspicion that sometimes keeps a ship from needing to be mended. The party went up the steps and vanished through a doorway that welcomed them as calmly as a harbor welcomes the right draft of hull. Inside they found a room built by hands that respect their own strength tables planed smooth, benches that didn't wobble, jars placed where reach makes sense. The woman of the house stood at a long board with herbs gathered in a geometry the eye could rest in, sage and bay, something bitter and useful, something sweet and shy, all taught to live together. Her name was Circe, and she held a wand with the same lack of fuss with which another woman might hold a ladle. She offered wine that had been reminded of its best behavior, and food that made work seem like a friend one would see again tomorrow. Our men ate, because hunger has its straightforward way of winning a vote. The lions watched with the polite gravity of temple statues that have learned how to pretend not to listen. Then the wand did what wands do when a room's rules have been written by someone else. A touch, a word shaped so correctly, the air preferred to obey it, and sailors who had stood at oars became pigs that stood at a trough, with their memories folded into them like notes in a pocket no longer needed. Eurylochus, who had kept his uneasy pact with the doorway, ran. He reached the beach with the speed that comes when a man is carrying facts no one wants. His story landed in pieces whole, woman, wand, our friends unmade, and still themselves enough to hurt. We prepared to go up with the tools that are proper to our trade decision: rope, a straight back, and if needed, iron. At the edge of the trees, a figure waited who had not been waiting a moment before, young in the way hills are young when a wind changes, smiling as only good advice smiles when it knows it will be needed. He named himself quickly and offered a sprig that looked like a small, stubborn light root, dark, flower pale, a plant with insurance written into it. "Moly," he said, and the word felt like a knot refusing to slip. "Take this. Her cup will find no purchase in you. When she touches, answer with steel. Not to wound, but to require terms. She will meet you at your correct size." Then he was gone in the way good counsel goes when it has given everything, and will not spoil it by staying. I went up alone. The hall smelled of warm wood and careful work. Circe poured the wine and invited me to sit in a voice that had the kindness of a well-run household. I drank, and the drink did its clever arithmetic and came to nothing. Her wand sought the world's easiest shape to impose, and found only the shape I was keeping. I drew steel not to start a war in a kitchen, but to say aloud the sentence that makes rooms fair: this is a table. These are names we will deal as equals or not at all. Her eyes measured and then agreed. The wand lowered. A smile changed its job from mask to conversation. She led me to an inner room where herbs dried in the manner of soldiers resting, orderly, facing the same way, ready to be of use, and spoke the words that undo words, the touches that return a man to his body. Our crew came back the way dawn comes back to a room. First the gray of recognition, then the color of names, then the warmth of being able to laugh at the shock in proper human tones. Cloaks were given, hair was smoothed with oil, bread and salted meat were set down, and shame was not asked to explain itself. A promise was made that no more transformations would be attempted while we were under her roof, and the promise held. We stayed because a ship sometimes needs a season that is not water. Days found their pattern with the relief of finding their coats on the hooks they prefer. We mended not only the sail and the seams, but the way men speak when they have been scared, the way hands reach for tools again after they have learned what it is to eat from a trough. Circe did not hoard knowledge. She taught us the names of plants that persuade wounds to close and fever to remember it has other appointments. How to grind this leaf and not that. How to make a paste that sends pain outside to walk in the yard until it forgets to come back. She taught me the grammar of a coastline, how to read a broken wave against a cliff and know where rock is pretending to be depth. How to count the breaths of a gust and hear what weather will ask tomorrow. How to borrow a wind by lowering your pride and your cloth at the same time. We taught her the issues of rope and sail, why a hitch that is fastest today may be the slowest tomorrow, how a knot can be a sentence or a lie, how to coil for the hand you will be tomorrow, and not the hand you are now. Pigs and lions watched us all with the contentment of beings whose inwardness had been repaired. A year is a straight word, but a curved experience. We marked it by the small faithful signs, first chill in the morning clay, then a spring that chooses to speak louder, then trees that remember to be generous, then a summer that thinks highly of itself and is forgiven for it, then evenings that ask for cloaks again. The island kept us without making us small. At night there were lamps and niches and the sound of a loom making its mathematical kindness, and sometimes a song that never asked to become performance. Men who had been rough with their sleep learned to sleep as if a bed were a friend. Eurylochus, who mistrusts what he should mistrust, learned to mistrust only what deserved it. When someone laughed loudly, no one winced. When someone wept quietly, no one asked him to explain the ocean to people who had already crossed it. We were restored in the way a net is restored knot by knot until it can hold again. When the word home began to show up in sentences without needing to be introduced, I told Circe the truth that had been growing beside us all along. We must go. She did not argue. She laid a chart of the mind on the table instead of a chart of seas warnings shaped like milestones. You will not go first to a port, she said. You will go to a place that is not a place, where the dead speak softly if you listen correctly. Tiresias will tell you what the living cannot. On the way back to life you will pass singers whose beauty is meant for wrecks. Wax is wiser than bravery there. Then a narrow where two troubles hold the sides, one many-mouthed, one hungry and circular. Choose the loss you can measure. After that, a bright island where the cattle of the sun graze like hours that must not be spent. Spend none of them. She said these things as a woman sets out bread, plainly, enough for all, with the confidence of someone who wants the eater to be strong later. We did not speak in the heroic tense. We put names on lines and lines on the inside of our heads. Provisioning became a rite. We salted meat until the smell of it meant safety. We racked water in amphorae that would forgive being knocked. We packed herbs into small cloth mouths and labeled them with a mark each man could remember even when tired. Circe walked the shore with me and measured the wind with her eyes, and told me where it hit a mood and where it was merely doing its job. We stood where waves finished themselves and said nothing for a while, as if listening for a piece of music we might be given later. When the morning came that had always been the morning, she put her hand on the gunwale and pressed it as if testing the health of a friend, and the wood answered with the modest creak, "Good ships." make when they acknowledge affection. We pushed off because that is how grateful men must behave toward time. The animals watched from the rise, not as a threat, but as witnesses. The hall stood behind them, with its work still in it. Tables, jars, herbs hung in rows, like a chorus waiting to be useful again. Circe raised a hand, not to claim, not to dismiss, but to say the sentence that keeps both welcome and departure clean. Go well. The sea took us back the way a patient road takes back a familiar cart. The oars wrote their pale lines and erased them. The sail found its honest curve, and the ship remembered its old conversation with distance. We did not cheer. We took our places. The men looked forward with a new steadiness that comes from having been taught without being shamed. And the island, which had become a good teacher, grew small behind us, without losing any of its size in our minds. We sailed toward a part of the map that does not spend much time being looked at, where the sea thins, into a slow river that goes around the world and the sky forgets to be blue and chooses pewter instead. The water was obedient and unhurried. The wind behaved like a clerk who has set everything in order for the night. We followed a strip of dimness that widened by degrees until it became the only light we were offered. The men spoke less, not from fear, but because the air itself suggested that words should be kept for useful errands. When the coast finally lifted, it did so like a low thought, wet with reeds and smelling faintly of iron and old leaves that have remembered rain. We found a place where the bank accepted a keel without asking questions, and stepped ashore the way one steps into a room where someone is sleeping on purpose, with care. Circe had been exact, and exactness is a comfort. We dug a narrow trench in soil that held together like a good sentence. Around it we set the simple offerings that persuade memory to come near without becoming loud. A libation of honey mixed with milk, then wine, then clear water. A sprinkle of barley that made a small dry rain and sounded like tidiness itself. Names were spoken in a tone one uses when calling a child in from a safe yard, and the night listened as if the night were a parent. We made the cuttings in the proper way, nothing showy, nothing cruel, and let the dark have what the dark has always been given. The men stood in a half circle, not to guard, but to agree, and the river moved along as if it had other business, and would attend to us as a courtesy. The ship waited with her bow on the mud and her mind on our hands. They came the way mist comes across a pasture-gathering shape, considering edges, satisfied to be seen without insisting. The first that stepped within the hush of our small fire was a boy we had not known, we had lost until he was standing where his name should have kept him from standing. Elpenor, gentle-footed, once quick to be useful, now quiet in the way the unburied are quiet. He asked for the favor all sailors understand, to be put back into the story of the living with the smallest ceremony. A stone, a stake, a name spoken at the right place on the shore we had left too neatly. The promise was made at once and properly by captain, by officers, by men who knew what weight a promise removes from a young shade's shoulders. He smiled the way dawn smiles before it decides to be bright and stepped back, satisfied to wait for us at the edge of patience. The next presence was not announced by fear, but by recognition that arrived before the mind had the right to prepare. My mother, Anticlea, with the household tidiness still about her, the way her hands folded over one another, the way her eyes counted faces, and found mine and kept their composure. She spoke of Ithaca and the small pieces that make a place honest, a hearth that draws well in certain winds, a tree that has learned to shade a bench at the proper hour, a lane where goats insist on their opinion. She said Penelope was faithful and busy, which is the same sentence said two ways, and that Telemachus had grown into the hallway, and no longer had to duck the lintel if he remembered not to hurry. I tried 3 times the ancient gesture arms around what arms remember, but the night has rules even love obeys. One must learn to be instructed by air. We spoke as people speak on either side of a door, evenly, without harming the wood. Then Tiresias, who carries distance the way other men carry tools, came with a staff that made sense of the ground by touching it. His voice did not perform, it arranged. He named the god who keeps the sea's temper, and reminded me that an anger earned cannot be hurried out of its work. He spoke of the singers who make wreckage sound like wisdom, and said that beeswax is a better courage than pride. He drew a narrow map between 2 darks, and set a finger where a rock keeps many mouths, and another where a whirl keeps one. Choose the loss you can measure, he said, and do not look for fairness where the tide does not trade. He pointed with words to a bright island where cattle move like hours that must not be spent. Spend none, he said, and the rest of the arithmetic will hold. Last, he gave me a task to carry into a country that knows nothing of oars. Take one on your shoulder and walk inland until a passer-by asks why you carry a winnowing fan to market. There make peace with the sea in the language of land, and your days will close as gently as evenings close in houses that have been well kept. Other shades approached and kept their manners, as if a cue had been agreed upon before we arrived. Agamemnon, who had once kept a camp noisy, spoke softly now and asked me to remember that doors at home can be more dangerous than gates abroad. The lesson was given as advice, not as bitterness. Achilles stood like a cliff that has decided not to fall, and said that glory has fewer uses where names do not buy bread. He asked for a word of his son, and was content with the measure of that word, neither more nor less. Many passed with the economy of travelers, who know they will be seen again, where stories rehearse themselves, a nod, a sentence, the brief wait of a hand that is only weight to the one who remembers it. We kept the trench, kept the order of offering, kept our voices low. The river approved of our behavior by not changing its mind. When the cup was empty of questions and the ground had been given back its dark, we closed the small work as we would close a chest. Cords in place, tools wiped and put away, the name of each thing returned to it. The men stepped back onto the ship with the careful gratitude of people leaving a room that had received them better than they deserved. We pushed off, and the water under the bow accepted the new sentence without asking for edits. The bank withdrew into its habit of reeds and dusk. The air grew less heavy by half a tone. No one spoke for a while because a good silence needs to finish its task before voices enter. Before the light returned to its usual business, we saw in our minds the shore we owed a tidy place on Circe's island where a stake, a stone, and a name would set Elpenor properly into the world again, and we agreed to go there first, because promises spoken to the dead are answered among the living. The river widened back into sea, and remembered how to glitter politely. The keel found the old conversation with salt and lift. A little bread went around, a little water, a little wine that knew how to behave. The watch was set with the brief instructions that sleep and safety prefer. And as we moved away from the border where memory changes its clothing, the ship breathed out and the men breathed in, and the night, persuaded by correct work, agreed to be ordinary again. We went back first to the tidy shore where Elpenor had asked to be remembered, and set his name where it should sit, a stake, a stone, a small heap built with hands that knew he had once carried for us and laughed with us. The wave that touched it approved without fuss. Then we launched again and found the sea trying on its gentlest mood-low swell, a wind that moved as if not to wake anyone, a sky that meant to be simple all day. Circe's last counsel traveled with us the way a good knot travels in a pocket. available, unshowy, exact. There would be singers ahead, she had said, whose beauty was designed for breaking things. Wax would be wiser than bravery. We took that sentence the way we take water necessary, and best taken before thirst becomes clever. Preparation is a kind of courtesy paid to fate. We warmed beeswax in a small pot until it remembered how soft it could be. It smelled clean and faintly of work done in fields far from the sea. Each man received a piece and shaped it with his fingers until it would agree to the ear without arguing. We spoke through the plan once, then again, then not again. Odysseus explained the rest the way he explains good rope, plainly. He would be tied upright to the mast, not as punishment, not as spectacle, but as a way to keep one promise without breaking another. If he signaled to be freed, they were not to free him. If he begged, they were to add turns. If he found new words for begging, they were to improve their knots. We chose a broad, forgiving line. We made a belt at the waist, a crossing at the chest, a turn above each elbow, and a final comfort at the ankles, so the body would understand the arrangement and not waste breath on complaint. The lashings were the kind that come loose quickly for friends, and not at all for mistakes. Nearer the place, the sea performed its old trick of flattening into a thought. Wind retired to the edge of the sky and stood there politely. The sail, no longer addressed, came down to rest and was bound in a way that would let it rise again without sulking. Oars went out into the good silence and accepted the work as if they had been born for it, which, in a sense, they had. One by one the men sealed their hearing, pressing the beeswax until it became a gentle plug between the world and the mind. They looked to the captain for the last time. He nodded. They nodded back. Then each face turned inward to the task of water and wood and the counting that keeps strokes even. The ship's own sound stepped into the foreground, the dip and lift, the small run of water along a plank, the breath that learns to sit at the same chair as the blade. The song did not fall upon us. It arrived as if remembering us from a kinder year. It began to my ears like an index spoken aloud, names I had met and names I had only meant to meet. Deeds measured not for their noise but for the way they fit into a pattern someone far away might admire. The voices braided flattery with history until the two were indistinguishable and modestly persuasive. They offered rest that was not the rest of sleep, but the rest of being finished, the dangerous kind that applauds you into stopping. They knew where each man had set down his first tool. They knew where I had left off a sentence and promised to finish it for me. They made the present feel like a hallway and promised rooms without drafts if only one would step through the nearest door. I said things that seemed powerful to me and would have sounded foolish to anyone else. The wax let none of it travel. The men rode on with faces like good houses' windows, shuttered against weather that belongs to other streets. The mast was honest wood beneath my shoulders. The rope did what rope does when asked politely to be firm. I asked for release with the eloquence of a sailor who has learned long sentences. The crew answered with extra turns that said they were listening correctly. I tried anger on, and anger wrinkled and did not fit. I tried reason, and reason discovered it had been invited to the wrong table. The song continued, patient as bookkeeping. It added a promise here, subtracted a worry there, offered the balance sheet of a life in which nothing heavy need be carried again. Once I understood that I would not be freed, I changed the only part left to me, how to hear. I stood inside the rope and let the voices be a map of all the roads I would not take today. They were beautiful in the way museum glass is beautiful. When one is tired and glad the picture cannot step out to help. I examined the scenes in the melody the way a carpenter examines joinery, not to break it, but to understand the pride in the making. Something in me wanted very much to call out the oars by name and rest the blades and turn the bow, but something older, a habit taught by smaller, wiser days, watched the wake and approved the arithmetic. Forward, forward, forward. The men sweated in unison. Beeswax shone at each ear like a small moon that had chosen useful work. The shore of the singers showed itself only in pieces, a pale ledge, a slope of tough grass, a bright litter at the tide line that did not belong to this year. I did not look directly for long. The song thickened once, then thinned, then returned to its first premise, that knowledge can be offered in exchange for motion if one is willing to sit very still. We kept moving. The oars wrote their clean script and erased it. My wrists learned the comfort of rope pulled tighter by friends who would apologize later with bread and laughter. I felt the moment the song realized it would not have us and became courteous again, no longer a net, simply a description of one. Sound changes slowly when you are the last person hearing it. The edge went out of it the way light goes out of a room at the end of a long conversation. The air remembered wind in a low voice. The sea creased itself into small, useful patterns. I tipped my head to tell the crew the worst hunger had passed. They did not see, which is a good answer. Only when the oars had counted safely beyond any echo did Odysseus the captain get what Odysseus the listener had not earned. He was loosed. The knots came away with the relief of tools returned to their shelves. Warm hands softened beeswax and eased it from ears. Men blinked as if waking, and the world returned sounding like water and wood and manageable distances. No one asked what the song had said. That is a superstition among us, and a wise one. Some offers are safer as weather reports delivered after the storm moves on. We raised a hand's width of cloth to greet the returning breeze and let the ship practice being taller again. Bread went around, water followed. A small cup of wine did its old domestic service of closing one door and opening another. The crew looked at their captain, the way men look at a man who has been near fire and come back with his eyebrows. There was no pity in it, only the quiet amusement of people who have done their part correctly. I said the only sentence a captain should say on a day like that: "Well rowed." It carried all the other sentences inside it. The orders given earlier and obeyed, the wax warmed and shaped, the lashings made firm, the choice to trust bees rather than pride. By late afternoon, the sea was the sea again, doing 1,000 small chores, and asking nothing from us we did not already mean to give. The wake braided and unbraided behind in its usual forgetful way. A gull tried the air above the mast and decided we were headed somewhere worth ignoring. The men cleaned the oar handles with the absent-minded care of people who have been busy with the correct kind of fear and are letting it step away. We spoke a little about knots, the best lay for a quick release that is not too quick, and someone told a short story about a jar of honey kept in a high cupboard at home, and a child who believed the cupboard to be a mountain. The laughter that met it was light and informed. Everyone in the room had climbed that mountain. Evening came on with its good routine. The sail took the color of bread in an oven. The ship found the small, precise groans from the old places where wood confers with wood and decides on sleep. Stars in their corners practiced being dependable. We set the watch with the fewest acceptable words, and let the rest be understood by habit. The sea, which keeps secrets well, kept this one what I had heard and what the crew had not, and asked nothing in exchange except that we continue. We obliged. The lamp at the prow made its modest circle, and escorted us through the mile that sits between every 2 miles. Somewhere ahead the narrow between 2 troubles waited. That would be tomorrow's page. Tonight belonged to beeswax cooling back to its honest shape, to rope coiled in its preferred direction, to oars laid down where they could dream of water without having to lift it. And sleep, which is the best singer, did the rest. After the singers, the water remembered its small chores, and we remembered ours, and in that good quiet, we saw ahead the long mouth of a strait, two headlands leaning toward one another, as if to speak in private. The air cooled a degree as wind narrowed to follow the stone. Circe's counsel sat in the mind like a true weight. Two troubles keep this passage, one that drinks whole ships, and one that snatches what it can reach. Choose the loss you can measure. We set our thoughts to that sentence as men set shoulders to a beam. I showed the men the lane we would take without giving it a sharper name than it needed. To the left, the sea gathered itself into a slow, deliberate throat that filled and emptied with a patience older than maps. It did not roar. It did the work of a mill, turning what it was given into what it always makes: depth, then more depth, then a circle that forgets itself. To the right rose clean rock that kept 6 dark notches like old windows. We studied none of it as spectacle. We treated it as a room with furniture that must be passed without bumping. Oars would be our feet, the hull our breath, the plan our politeness. We came down to smaller cloth so the sail would not talk too loudly in the narrow. Lines were tightened, then tightened again. I walked the benches and set the order and tones, save for quiet water and careful work. Eyes on the blade and the man before you. If the sea leans, you lean the other way. Do not look up when the cliff speaks. Answer only the water. If I say pull short, you pull short. If I say hold, you hold until the wood has told you it is pleased. The men nodded in the rhythm we keep for understanding. Eurylochus checked each thole pin as if it were a sentence to be read, and the young lookout tied his cloak higher so it would not think of the oar as a chair. The ship entered the passage as a hand enters a sleeve deliberately, turning a little to find the seam. The current took hold, not harshly, but with the authority of a road that insists on being walked on its own terms. To port, the water darkened and slid downward in a slow helical courtesy. To starboard, the rock stood close enough to make our voices decide to be smaller. I called the strokes tight and even, the way you would thread a needle you cannot afford to drop. The men answered with that old, good music, dip and lift, writing pale lines on the skin of the sea and erasing them immediately, because this was not a place for signatures. The first pull of the whirl came across our knees like a quiet persuasion. The bow obeyed as far as it was polite to obey. The rudder corrected by degrees you could measure with a thumbnail. I felt the ship consider the left-hand hunger and choose against it. We kissed the cliff with our attention, without letting the hull be introduced. Somewhere above, something ancient shifted its weight in the stone. No more sound than a rope settling on a peg. I told the crew a story about bread at supper to keep the air at the proper size, and in that moment the sea remembered to be our friend for 3 strokes in a row. Then, from the rock that keeps its 6 notches, came a reaching quick, economical, as if the cliff had decided to take attendance. It did not announce itself with brightness or with noise. It took the shape of absence, a bench suddenly lighter, a name that had been in the mouth of the watchcaller and now required a different word. Oars left standing in their pens like questions that would be answered later. We did not turn to count. Counting has a sound that calls for more of what you are counting. We kept the rhythm that keeps the hull upright. I said a single name quietly, the way you set a cup properly on a shelf, and the men answered it by pulling cleanly on the next stroke. The whirl to port chose that moment to show a little of its mathematics, a draw and a let go, a breath that goes deeper than a chest should. The bow climbed the shoulder of what the circle had made and slid down, and the ship's timbers spoke from the old places where wood discusses its loyalties with iron. We matched our weight to the deck's need. The next 3 strokes were longer, the next 5 shorter, and the lane opened 1 oar's length farther before us, which is more than enough for those who are ready to use it. We passed the worst of it not with triumph, but with the same small manners we had used to enter. Do not scrape. Do not rush. Do not invite opinion from stone or water. The cliff receded by inches, and then by the thought of inches. The circle behind us finished its sentence without us, and began another for someone else. Only when the headlands had put a full ship's length between their shoulders and our stern did I let the men hear what they already knew. Well held, I said, and added, because it needed saying, for those we could not hold, we will keep the work straight. We put back a hand's width of sail so the wind, pleased to be useful again, could take some of the weight from the oars. Water was passed, a little wine after. Bread set where the fingers would find it without searching. No one spoke the names that had been set down by the rock. Not yet. Grief is good at its job when the deck is steady. We coiled the spare lines more carefully than necessary, and let the neatness stand for what could not be made neat. Eurylochus wiped an oar, though it did not need wiping. The young lookout stared ahead, as if distance were a task he could complete for us. When the sea broadened back to a place that allows choices, we allowed ourselves the smallest ceremony that does not lie. A length of cord was tied to the forward thwart, and knotted 6 times in the way a boy is taught to keep count on his fingers. The knots were not named aloud. A cup went over the side and a clean arc, and the water kept it, as the water keeps much that it does not boast of. I told a story in 2 sentences about a field above Ithaca, where time is always a little ahead of the calendar, and the men, who have known that field without standing on it, nodded as if they could smell it from here. Evening came properly. The strait behind us became a narrow idea the horizon would handle. Ahead the sea set out its long, legible lines again, as if a book had been closed on one chapter and opened on the next without scolding the reader for pausing. We set the watch, the kind that checks the wind with its cheek and the sky with the part of the eye that does not panic. The ship breathed with the men, and the men, who had held when holding was the whole world, let their shoulders remember that bone and rope are separate things. Night lifted itself out of the water, and hung where it always hangs. Stars took their posts, and did not blink at us more than they should. The wake forgot to remember itself, which is a kindness. I stood with a hand on the tiller and let Tarsius's arithmetic and Circe's grammar sit together in the mind. Choose the loss you can measure. Keep to the lane that is truly a lane. Do not ask the sea to be fair. Ask it to be itself and answer with correct work. The door back to ordinary water had opened because we had not demanded a larger door. Before sleep took the benches I walked them once, touching here and there, not to fix, not to command, but to agree with wood and men that the day had been done correctly. The knots on the forward thwart looked like small, dark stars in their own little sky. I lifted my eyes to the larger ones, and let them be counted without giving them jobs. The ship turned a little to hear a wind that had decided to come along, and we went on, reduced by what could not be refused, kept by what could still be kept, and guided by the oldest lesson a captain is allowed to learn. Forward, at the pace of breathing, toward the next honest task. If you are still awake, let the sea carry the rest for you. The strait is behind us. The water ahead is wide and reasonable. Oars are laid down where they can dream of work without having to lift it. The lamp at the prow draws its small, steady circle and moves it forward, the way a hand moves a bookmark along a page. Somewhere far from here, A low wall of stones holds the day's warmth. A door that sticks will open when a familiar hand lifts while it pulls. An olive tree leans over a path that knows the sound of careful feet. Keep those small pieces and let the larger ones arrive when they please. Tonight there is no hurry. The ship breathes. The sky keeps its promises. The sea hums its old, unambitious song. Close your eyes and let the wake unbraid itself behind you. We will keep the watch. You can rest.